Welcome to the ultimate age of the geek, where we take deep dives into TV and film and take a look at these projects through nerd vision goggles. We are your hosts. I'm Quiggs, and this is Dave.
Hello there.
So this week we are talking about Predator and the new sequel slash prequel, Prey. So Dave, what were your thoughts on Predator?
Yeah, so it's been a very long time since I've seen Predator, at least 10 years, easily. So it was pretty cool to come back to it and watch it with a little bit of a critical eye. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I was not old enough to go see this in theaters or anything, but I wonder what it was like back in 1987 when this came out, because I feel like it almost starts off like the movie Commando, I think it is, with Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know, normally Arnold Schwarzenegger is not the underdog of his movies. And so it starts off that way, where Arnold Schwarzenegger and his buddies are just wrecking. You know, they're called in, everything leading up. It's like, oh, these are the best of the best. You know, they have a little bit of that tension of like, why are we here? You know, what are we doing, etc. And I just really enjoyed that it goes from feeling very standard Schwarzenegger to something very different. And I'm curious how much people knew about that going into the movie, and if some of the love of the movie was just that surprise of like, you think this is, you know, Schwarzenegger wrecking, but in reality, at the end, he is the underdog.
It had been a long time for me as well since I've seen that movie, and I forgot how iconic it was. I mean, you've got the iconic get to the chopper line. I used the meme template of Arnold and Carl Weathers kind of like clasping hands and flexing.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, there's so many memes today that spawn off of this movie. When I've seen them, I knew they were from this movie, but it's just funny when you get like those shots or those lines, and you get to them in the movie and you're like, you know, you get a little extra laugh because of their modern day context.
It was like nostalgia inception because I used that meme years ago. I used it actually maybe a month ago. And then now I'm seeing it in the movie. I'm like, that's great.
Did you not know where it was from, or you did?
I had just forgotten. I had forgotten
Gotcha.
where it was from. And then it happens in the movie right near the beginning.
Yeah.
I couldn't help but laugh.
Carl Weathers did a pretty solid job of looking almost as big as Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Carl Weathers was coming fresh out of the Rocky movies, so he was in his prime. Just a huge dude.
Even so, I don't think anyone in the movie really compares in size to Schwarzenegger, but he really gets close.
Very, very true. We should do the synopsis.
All right. A team of Spec Ops soldiers led by Arnold Schwarzenegger are sent into a remote, non-specific area of South America to assist the CIA in extracting some prisoners. The team makes their way through the jungle and quickly dispatch of the camp. They learn Dylan, their CIA team member, lied about the prisoners to get the best at the job and was really after information. He takes the only survivor, Anna, as a hostage as the team head out back into the jungle to get to the chopper and return to safety. While making the return trip, they become aware something else is in the jungle. After Anna tries to escape, Pancho tries to chase her down, but is slain directly in front of her, leaving only blood. This leads the team to one by one be picked off as the predator is killing them all. Arnold helps Anna get to the chopper, but stays behind to finish the job as the only member of the team remaining. After a brutal battle, he manages to kill the predator, but not before it can set off a massive bomb. Arnold manages to survive, and he and Anna fly off into the sunset.
Yeah, so the very first thing that I want to talk about is I feel like Poncho's character was kind of underutilized. I mean, he was the red shirt guy, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. We'll get into this when we kind of compare Predator and Prey,
Hmm.
right? But I think in both of these movies, you get two characters that have the vast majority of the development. And then you get a bunch of other people who they get basically no development, and whether you like them or not really hinges on some of the directing choices, some of the editing choices, and the charisma of the actors.
Yeah. One of the biggest things to me was that with the big squad that they had, I guess because of that large cast, they were unable to utilize them very well. It's an action movie. You're not expecting great drama. I would say there were maybe three characters that were pretty significant and important.
Sure. I mean, obviously, Dutch and Dylan, which is Arnold and Carl Weathers.
And then the third one, well, I don't know. I went back and forth on this for a while. It could have been Billy or it could have been Mac. I wasn't sure which one was more important because Billy gives us a lot of backstory on the Predator with stories from his
Mm,
people, as well as the woman that they capture. She gives some back history on that as well. But Mac is one of the first to see the creature. And that part, if it wasn't so intense, it would be incredibly hilarious. And I couldn't help but laugh because when Mac
yeah.
sees the Predator for the first time, I think it had just killed Blaine at that point in the movie.
Hmm.
And he sees the Predator and he just starts shooting into the forest, into the woods.
Oh, I definitely laughed at that part when he starts shooting, and then like Arnold comes up, and he's just like okay, and starts shooting, and like each of them come up, and they don't ask any questions, they don't look, they just start blasting into the forest, no regard whatsoever.
I timed it. That scene from first bullet to last bullet lasts 1 minute and 1 second. So there is an entire 61 seconds of just them shooting bullets into the woods.
I know, yeah, no, I was laughing too because it was just absolutely ridiculous.
It was funny to me because one of the big things that I found out, the casting director, Jackie Birch, she wanted to get all Vietnam vets for the movie originally. And she succeeded for the most
Mm,
part, with the exception of Mac
yeah.
Elliott and Carl Weathers and the guy who played Billy. Those were like the only three in the squad that didn't actually have any formal military training. Arnold served in the Austrian Nation Army for a little bit before he went AWOL for bodybuilding competition. Pancho was a Vietnam vet, played by Richard Chavez. Blaine Cooper was played by Jesse Ventura, who actually was an ex-Navy SEAL who served 6 years in Vietnam.
Shane Black is not a Vietnam vet, is he?
He is not. No.
Okay.
So I'm sorry. He was also one of them that wasn't.
Yeah. So about 50% of them.
Pretty much, yeah.
It doesn't surprise me, even though this takes place in some random, unnamed South American nation. The way it's shot and everything, it definitely has a feel similar to a lot of Vietnam movies. And I actually, in my memory, before watching the movie again, I had thought that it took place in Vietnam.
And I had to go back and look because when I found out that little tidbit, I thought, oh, wait, where is the location? It is eerily similar to what at least we've been shown in cinema.
So one thing about Mac that I just have to say is that that guy spends the whole movie where he's not shooting a gun, shaving his head. He has that razor on his face or on top of his head in every scene where he's talking. I honestly would laugh every time I saw it.
Yeah, it was an odd quirk, and they all had their oddities, which was so cool. They worked them in somehow. The one guy said stupid jokes. The one guy was shaving all the time. The other guy was racist and was chewing tobacco. And they all had their little quirks, which was really interesting. They all had their kind of little personalities that came out a little bit in the movie. And with Mac, it was also really cool that he and Blaine were buddies and they kind of worked together and stuck together during the mission. And when Blaine dies, Mac takes that really hard. And there's this mourning scene.
Yeah, he goes a bit crazy.
Yeah, there's a mourning scene for him and his friend. He kind of pours one out for Blaine. And ever since then he has got this vendetta against the Predator,
Yeah.
which comes into play later. He goes off on his own to try and kill the thing.
Yeah. And another thing about Mac, I don't know if you noticed this, but when he dies, he gets shot in the head by the plasma blast. And it shows what look to me at least like his head exploding. But then when Dylan comes across him, he sees his face. I think it was just a production gaffe, you know. Production gaffes like that exist a lot more in older movies. One of the big reasons for that is because back then they were working off film and it was a lot harder to like actually see what you did that day.
So Billy, another, kind of small side character, but people speculate that now this is not directly tied, at least not to my knowledge, but even though he's played by a Seminole and Cherokee actor, people are wondering if he is supposed to be some sort of Comanche connection to the Prey movie because of the stories he tells.
Yeah, I definitely had assumed that he was Comanche.
But the one scene that I kind of wish they had extended by at least a half a minute was when he goes to give Dutch and the woman a chance to escape. And he is standing on that tree bridge, that log bridge, and throws his gun, takes out his machete, and cuts himself across his chest and shouts out that war cry. That was incredibly hardcore and amazing. And I wish that, like, that would have given anyone a pause, right? And
Mhm.
I wish that they had just shown like the Predator coming towards him, and then he does that, and then it just stops for a second, like it hesitates.
I don't think the Predator would have hesitated.
I don't know, because they're it turns out, through future movies and in this one, they're somewhat noble warriors. And so I wonder if it would have stopped even just to acknowledge the fact that, hey, this is a pretty wild act. And I mean, I'm about to eviscerate you and take your spine and skull, but that was pretty cool.
I think there's moments like those that were a little limited by the technology of the time. Like I feel as though they would have liked to have a little bit extra in that scene, right? But, probably cost quite a bit for every moment that Predator's on screen.
Oh, it did. And they actually ran out of money before they could finish filming. And a new head of the studio came in, saw the three-quarters of the film that they had, and said, "Yeah, go finish it."
And you could see it definitely. I mean, it's hard to judge the effects of 1987 by today's standards, right? I feel like that scene would have been a little longer if they had today's budget and technology.
Yeah, I was actually still pretty fairly impressed with the special effects.
I think all the practical stuff looks really good. The suit looks good, though there are a couple times where you get like close-ups of his hands doing stuff, and I'm like, I can totally tell that that is a rubber glove. But besides those few moments, I felt all the practical effects in the suit look really good. The cloaking, it looks pretty rough. I don't know what it looked like at the time, but I don't think it takes away from the movie. But there are movies from the 80s and even early 90s, right? I think the effects hold up. The effects of Terminator 2 hold up for sure. There were moments in this that I was like, ugh. But the design of the suit is really cool. I mean, it's great. One thing I really like about it is what I find this is really common today, where it's like, oh, this is an alien, but they look like a human. Star Trek does this, and where it's like, oh, that's just a person painted green. So it was really cool that they actually created a very otherworldly design.
Right. Still somewhat anthropomorphic, but altogether different.
So I can get behind the idea of it being slightly anthropomorphic, basically making it make sense that it could hold weapons, that it could hold and build spaceships and etc. To me, it definitely looks otherworldly.
So I think the only other person besides Dutch who got a really good look at the thing was Al Dillon, played by Carl Weathers. He, along with Mac, they try and go and kill the thing. And of course, Mac dies.
I felt he got kind of an off-screen death, didn't he? I was a little sad about that. I felt like he was like the other main character besides Arnold Schwarzenegger.
For an action movie. He had the most character development. He started out by using everybody as a means to an end, and then ended up caring about the group's welfare so much that he goes out by himself to find Mac and try and kill the Predator and give them a chance to escape. And I felt like that was kind of a big deal.
I really liked his character. I liked Carl Weathers in that role. He was one of the more interesting characters, which again is why I was like, oh, we don't even get to find out how he dies.
So let's talk about Dutch. In most action movies, you get the lone wolf, right? John Wick being one of the most recent ones that come to my mind. And while Arnold does hit this towards the end, it's cool to see a leader played well, genuinely cares about his men and knows their strengths and weaknesses. Like he comes up with the plan to infiltrate the base. He knows who to utilize when for demolitions and for setting up traps and setting watches and things like that. And he takes what he's learned from them over what I'm assuming is the course of them serving together to try and then set up traps for the Predator towards the end. And he even goes so far as to having compassion for his men that when they die, he tries to go and look for their bodies, give them an honorable burial. And it was really cool to see that in an action movie, especially in the 80s, because that's when action movies were taking off and doing great. And it was cool to see that compassionate leader side.
Yeah, what I love about Arnold Schwarzenegger is whether he is in a good movie or a bad movie, and he has made both, he always has those lines, right? Those lines that are just so quotable and so hilarious. We get like a lot of like quippy one-liner stuff from Marvel, but like nothing really is the same as like an Arnold one-liner. There's a million from, is it Batman and Robin?
Not the greatest, but definitely quotable.
No, it's a terrible movie, but you always remember all his one-liners. And besides the obvious get to the chopper, one that made me laugh out loud, I actually like backed the movie up, is when they're taking out the camp and he throws a knife through a dude and it goes out his back and sticks into like a post. And the guy is just like hanging there dead. And he goes, "Stick around," and just walks off. I was dying at that moment.
Yep. I wonder if there was something in his contract that just said, I need to insert at least one terrible, corny one-liner.
The thing is, though, even though they're corny, like I think anyone else, very few people can deliver them in such a way in which like they're so awesome.
It's true. I have a friend who she delivers the corniest, punniest jokes, and they're great. I mean, they make you boo and hiss, but the way she delivers them is great.
I absolutely love how Arnold delivers these lines. Most other people, you would be like, "Oh, that was so bad," but when Arnold does it, it's just like, "Oh man, that was hilarious." Well, let's talk about the final fight. All his men are killed, and he manages to get Anna to the chopper, and he has decided to basically go mano a mano with the Predator. He has taken all that he's learned and sets up a series of traps for it. I thought the final fight was really cool, and it's like I said earlier, it's not often that you have Arnold Schwarzenegger as the underdog, right? And he is using wits and ingenuity over his extreme brawn.
Yeah, you don't see that very often in some action movies. You might see like, oh, they get really lucky and knock the head off of a fire extinguisher and it distracts the bad guy enough for them to shoot him or something. But you don't see anything like him setting up the traps, creating the vine system that he was using to swing through the from tree to tree, evading the predator's tracking.
Oh, I really, really liked how he discovered that the mud kept him hidden.
So that's one of the things I was going to mention is that it was really cool how in Predator you get little tidbits here and there, and they very slowly learn these things about the Predator. And it felt more believable as opposed to some shows and movies where characters make great leaps and just arrive at these conclusions. And it's like, how did you got that from that 1 2 second interaction you had with the creature?
Everything did feel earned in the end.
Yeah, it was cool. And I thought it was really cool too how he sets up that one trap with the knives and the spikes to try and lure the predator into him and kill it that way. And it notices his trap and starts going around the other way, but triggers another one of his traps.
Yeah, well, I assumed that the first trap was really a ploy, right? He made it there to be noticed, so the trap behind it would not be discovered.
Yeah, but you could still see it though in his face when it didn't go for that first trap because he was just so beat to a pulp at that point that he was just kind of like, I wanted it to be over. You could see it in his face.
But yeah, overall, I thought Predator was great. It has the right amount of cheesy moments. It was a lot of fun. I really liked a lot about it.
So, Prey being technically a prequel, but not quite billed as that. The way that the directors and the producers kind of build it was as a sequel slash prequel. So there were some tie-ins, but it was in almost its own story, standalone.
Yeah, I mean, it basically is. You could watch this without ever seeing even the first Predator, and I think it would be good. I thought Prey was awesome. The cinematography was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The characters I thought were very strong, especially the main character. But I also really, really liked her brother and the mother. And I felt like for the limited amount of time we got them, I could tell the difference between all the other hunters. I really enjoyed it a lot. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not like the most game changing movie ever or anything. Like, it's still an action movie when it comes down to it, but I felt like it was an action movie that had a lot of heart.
So I liked it. I thought that it was great action. I thought it was a great addition to the Predator series, tying up some loose ends and furthering the story of the Predator in a way that still felt kind of fresh and new. Was very interesting to me. And I agree with you. The cinematography, oh my gosh, it brought back vibes to me of like almost Lord of the Rings level,
The cinematography really reminded me of The Revenant. I think it's that like old west landscaping.
but just absolutely gorgeous establishing shots and
Yeah.
those scenic kind of
Oh my
panning
gosh.
views, just awesome. I loved those.
Yeah.
But I think I differ with you on the characters. And maybe it's just because in the first one I couldn't tell those two guys apart, and in this one I couldn't tell any of the other hunters apart from Naru, Taabe, and the mother. Like I could tell those three apart, I guess I should say, but I couldn't tell any of the hunters apart. Like they were just kind of their own clique for me.
You didn't recognize the guy. I don't know his character's name, but the guy who she gets in that fight with.
No, I could not because to me they were all just kind of the same clique. All the hunters just had the same personality and the same behavior towards
Hmm.
Naru. And they just seemed kind of the same. And I feel like a lot of the actors in this were more new actors, and it felt a little more wooden to me, which, they still delivered some things pretty well, but they still felt kind of wooden to me. And the main character felt more one note.
I would very much disagree with that.
She's got this chip on her shoulder, this thing to prove. That is the only thing that I feel like we kind of see. There's one tiny other moment that we see, but that's the main thing, the main driving force of her in the movie, and it kind of gets old for me.
See, I didn't really read it that way at all. I really felt like she wanted to protect her family and protect her people. She wanted to feel that she had a place to protect her family and people, like that she would be recognized. I definitely disagree as far as that. I think the original characters felt a lot more one note to me than the characters in this.
I think that is a point that we're going to disagree on. But let's go ahead and get into the synopsis and then we can talk about those characters.
In 1719, in the Great Plains, Naru dreams of being a hunter and completing a ritual hunt of something that will be hunting her back. She is not taken very seriously by the other members of her tribe, including her brother and mother. After a mountain lion attacks and drags away a member of the tribe, Naru joins her brother, Taabe, and several others to track down the animal. Along the way, Naru notices signs of something else in the wilderness and becomes worried for her brother. As most of the hunting party return with their injured member, Naru stays out with Taabe and another to bring down the cat. She is injured and her brother completes the hunt. Back home, no one believes her about the signs she saw, and so she heads off with her dog to prove she is right and keep her people safe. She eventually is attacked by a bear and is almost killed before the predator attacks it and kills it in single combat. Naru escapes and finds a search party for her, who she warns about the imminent danger. They don't believe her, and the predator attacks again. Naru, once again, barely escapes and is nearly killed before she is caught in a bear trap when the predator backs off. Naru is discovered by French fur trappers and imprisoned, where she is reunited with her brother. The fur trappers put Naru and Taabe out as bait for the predator, but he attacks them instead, dispatching them in brutal fashion. Finally, Naru and Taabe fight the predator, but Taabe dies, allowing Naru to escape. Using her knowledge and ingenuity, Naru lays a trap for the predator and uses his own gadgets and contraptions against him until she is finally victorious. I really enjoyed how they used the predator a lot in this. I would say the predator in this movie is felt far more of a character to me than the predator in Predator.
You got the same level of slow trickle feed of information to the characters, but more about the personality of the predator than just the facts. So Naru was able to figure out, no, this thing has this code of honor. It wouldn't, when she was caught in the bear trap, it wouldn't kill her because she wasn't able to fight back. And so she kind of was able to see a little bit further into that warrior culture, maybe that shared warrior culture that they had. And that was cool because that was something that the original didn't have. They hadn't gone into that whole honor thing. That wasn't actually introduced until the second movie.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed, like, as we're kind of going about just the life of Naru and everything with the mountain lion, we're getting these little flashes of the predator, and every time he is hunting other predators. And I thought there was a lot of parallel between what Naru discussed about this like ritual that they go on, right? The trial where they have to hunt something that will hunt them back. And I felt like what the movie was saying was that the predator was doing the same thing. Even though I feel like we kind of know that from other predator movies and everything, the way they told that in this movie, they got all of that same stuff across without really telling you anything specifically about their species or anything. It's just the establishing shots, the shots of him hunting down progressively larger animals. And you didn't get a good look at it, at his design, up until that scene where he's attacking the fur trappers.
Right. Which made it all the more daunting.
Yeah, it was that slow buildup, which I really liked. I thought that was the way to go. They did that in the first Predator movie as well, but I think they did it a lot better in this one. I felt like this Predator, had a personality. It had certain desires other than hunt. I felt like there was more captured about this predator than there was in the original. And also the design. I really liked the gadgets, honestly. I really enjoyed the devolving of the gadgets from the first movie. The shield was awesome. I love when he like cuts the dude's head off with the shield. The whole tree basically just goes. I also really like that this predator, he takes a beating.
But I saw something that suggested that the predator in Prey was the largest, beefiest of all the predators seen on screen, besides the one in The Predators, because I think I heard there were two predators in that, which there was like a regular predator and an alpha predator. So besides that movie, the one in Prey was supposed to be the biggest and beefiest of all the predators. So Naru's mother, though, I loved her. She was good. She was encouraging. There were a lot of lines and a lot of scenes that showed how much she cared for her kids.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it was really cool, and like the tribe in general is really cool to see. I've no expertise whatsoever in this subject, but the way that they show them living, I just felt like the way that that was portrayed, it felt very authentic, and it felt really cool to see have this look at how life was lived then.
Yeah, it definitely helped for me to kind of ground me and establish the time period they were in. It was a nice draw. I mean, it really made me feel like I understood the dire straits. Survival was hard enough already, and now there's this creature hunting. Taabe was awesome too.
Oh yeah, he was great.
I thought he was a little wooden, and I think it's because he's a new actor. I read a report somewhere that said he was basically hired straight out of a retail store job, but some of his delivery on the lines were really good, and he had a lot of good parts to play. I loved how like he was honest and caring with Naru from the beginning, like great brother
Hmm.
figure, sometimes brutally honest with her, while also still being uplifting and encouraging to her.
I feel like there's certain tropes that easily could have been played in his position. And I don't feel like he fit into those tropes. That's partially the writing and partially the acting. I feel like he made some good decisions on how to portray this character, this older brother who's protective, but not overbearing. What you expect in this situation is to have this overbearing brother. And he's not overbearing, he's encouraging and helpful, and not even against her hunting. And even when she wants to come on the hunt for the lion and the others are like, no way, he is the one that convinces them to let her come along. And even though he says it's because of her medicine and she's a good tracker, I feel as though he knowingly is saying, I trust you to be with us.
Oh, he definitely is. And I think it is because she's great with medicine and a good tracker. I mean, they established that from the beginning. She's really good at those things, but she's never really been on a hunt before. So I think that he is just being honest with her at that point. Like, yeah, she's a good tracker and a good with medicine. So yeah, why shouldn't she be a part of the party? That's basically like having a ranger and a cleric in your party right there. She's multi-classed, so why wouldn't you have her in there? And I don't think that Naru would have had as big of a chance against this thing one-on-one unless Taabe had gotten in some really heavy hits on this thing towards the end of the movie.
Oh, I mean, not just Taabe. He still fought off a massive number of fur trappers, many of which shot him several times. He was stuck in a bear trap. They actually were able to get him down. He took some wounds, and then Taabe definitely dealt the worst of it because he took his own weapon and impaled him with it. What Taabe accomplished is something that we didn't get to see in the first movie. Is nobody does crap to the predator before Arnold fights it. I think they shoot him a little bit when they shoot into the jungle for over a minute straight. But in this one, people are really hitting this thing and it just keeps going. They hit it with everything they have and it keeps going. And even Taabe does even better than anyone else and it's still going. And I felt like his death was really well handled.
So I disagree with you on that last point, and that leads me into talking about some of the wooden and one note acting that I kind of felt was in the movie. So they do have a scene after Taabe's death where Naru's washing up at the river and looks just kind of shell shocked. And then later on, she says one line about how this thing kills her brother. She's going to make it bleed. And that's kind of it. And just the comparison between that and how some of the characters are in the first one, where Arnold showed real concern for his squad mates, almost frantically running into the forest to find them. And a couple of the characters, they had these extended mourning scenes for their companions. It felt like it passed over too quickly. I don't think it was handled to the effect that it could have been.
Not every death needs to be met with this absolute wailing or epic speech or whatever. It's more realistic to show grief in a different way. And to me, Naru shows her grief in a detached, kind of determined resolve. Even though she's tracking this thing or trying to, she spends a lot of the movie escaping from it, right? Like once she actually meets it with the bear, she runs. And then she gets captured by, well, she gets in the fight with the search party, and they kind of like tie her up, and then they get killed and she runs, and then she gets captured by the fur trappers and they get killed and she runs, and her and her brother take it on and he gets killed and she runs. And I think after that she became very determined, and I think a lot of times it's just as realistic, if not more, to show that kind of grief in a very detached way.
I think for Taabe, especially for her brother, I think that more mourning time should have been given. She spends more time mourning the buffalo than she does mourning her brother in the movie.
Yeah, so let's talk about Naru. I think what really solidified me liking this character really comes down to the final moments when she's giving that speech to the last remaining fur trapper. She is just waiting for the predator to show up. I think that is where it's showing that change in her, where she went from constantly escaping, and then finally that was where she kind of took her stand. And
yeah, that was a cool moment. And then her sidestepping the predator.
Yeah, the tension in that, it was really great. We didn't mention this before, but I really enjoyed actually the choice to use French fur trappers, because all of the dialogue by them is in French. It feels very disorienting then to just not have a clue what they're saying through the whole movie.
It just continues to solidify that whole point of view from Naru as a Comanche, which I think is even more establishing that era. I liked that.
And so when she is talking to the guy, and she knows he can't understand her, so that speech really wasn't for him. It was really for herself. It was a character defining moment, and that is really kind of her journey, right? Is she, from the beginning of the movie, she wants to prove herself, but there's always something holding her back, and she is always coming right up to the danger and kind of trying to escape from it. And then finally, in the end, she does take a stand and makes a plan, which they definitely also set up, that she uses her wits and her intelligence to take out the predator, not any kind of specific skill.
I liked how early on they establish her as a very skilled tracker, an herbalist, and how throughout the movie she's, practicing with her axe, getting better at hunting, and she has this kind of progression of she's hunting small game, almost like she's kind of working her way up as well.
The way that the action was shot, too, you felt like you knew what was happening, but at the same time, it was very visceral. That is really hard to do, to give that panicky feeling, but not have shaky cam, which I hate shaky cam. It should be used very few and far between for specific things, but I hate it in fight scenes. I want to be able to tell what's happening, and I never felt like I couldn't tell what was happening, but it also felt very claustrophobic almost, in a good way. Each fight felt so contained. You just felt like you were almost trapped, especially the part where she really uses that axe to great effect. I'm also really glad that the axe wasn't a big part of her taking down the predator. I really thought it was going to be, but I really appreciated that they didn't go that way because I was kind of nervous.
I know. It would have felt a little lame that a little axe could have done that. So I'm with you on that. I'm glad they didn't do that.
I loved how they set up all of the moments of that final fight with the mud and her learning about like the reticles and how she kills him ultimately with his own weaponry. I also really liked how she tricked him into cutting off his own arm. Yeah, I think there were maybe just a handful of moments that I felt required a little bit of suspension of disbelief. There's one part where he like throws her to the ground and she like jumps off like a 30-foot branch onto him. It's an action movie. There has to be suspension of disbelief, right? I think that still existed in the first one too, except for when it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think we just are so used to suspending our disbelief, but in reality, he would break a million bones too.
So I did like a lot of Naru's aspects. And again, I'm not sure if this is because she's more of a newer actor, but I felt like she was very, very much so a one-note character. Whereas I felt and maybe, admittedly, maybe some nostalgia is at play here, but I felt that Dutch's character in the first was a little more dynamic than Naru's. I mean, they had some similar crossover traits, but Naru in the beginning is very focused on this need to be a hunter, this need to be recognized as a hunter, and it is said almost a dozen times. It is mentioned almost a dozen times in this movie, and it was getting really old to me towards the end, and it ended up taking away some of the like that I had for her character because of that. I still liked her character well enough. I was just kind of over the whole motivation that she had, which seemed to be her only central point in the movie. And the things that just solidified that for me as the movie went on was we already talked about number one, her brother's death. They gave more time in the movie for her mourning the buffalo than she did her brother. I guess an argument could be made for not having speeches and these drastic, dramatic mourning moments, but I feel like Taabe kind of deserved a little bit more like what the buffalo got than just a little one line mention in the speech that she had and some shaking by a river. Even Tabe's mother had more of a reaction to them both being missing than Naru had for her brother having been killed off by this creature. And she doesn't even mourn him at the end either, it seems. All of this crap happens, and she does mention once that she wants to be a hunter to help protect and provide for her clan. But she says that, and then I think 20 or 30 minutes later in the movie, when she meets up with I'm going to call them the bullies, but the other hunters, when she meets up with the bullies and they're kind of making fun of her, not listening to her about the predators, she just starts a random fight with them. And that just plays into the trope of like, oh, you know what? They only understand one thing. I'm going to make them understand like this. And that is a trope in movies that I just have never liked and never saw the reason of.
I don't think she really is the one to start that fight. I feel like he is. They are physically trying to stop her from leaving.
They're egging her on, but she starts the fight. Kind of happens out of nowhere. Like he might have grabbed her arm to stop her from running off, but then she just starts wailing on him, like attacking him. And I'm like, where the heck did that come from? If she wants to protect her clan, why is she beating up these people? Obviously they're bullies, but whatever. And then
I think at that point, she is trying to warn her brother. They are trying to basically take her and take her back. And she's trying to warn her brother and find a way to get rid of this thing because it is very much a threat to them.
it just, like I said, it plays into the trope of I gotta quote unquote speak these people's language and use whatever they understand, and she just attacks him to try and prove her point or somehow bring whatever conflict to a resolution. And it's just really weird. It felt a little heavy-handed to me. That all of that stuff that I mentioned before, plus the final scene where after everything has happened, all the hunters, or at least the majority of the hunters in the tribe, are dead, and her brother is dead, and she like limps back into camp And right then and there, they start doing like the hunter ceremony, and she just smiles and is happy. And it's like, dude, what? She's like so focused on this hunter thing.
I think you're reading into a lot of stuff here, to be honest. You and I saw this very differently.
Maybe, but it is definitely mentioned almost a dozen times that she wants to be a hunter and be taken seriously.
It is mentioned a lot, but after she runs into it, she's not talking about being a hunter. She's talking about protecting everyone and finding a way to take this thing out. But I mean, it didn't bother me. You definitely read a lot more into some of these things than I definitely did.
But there's no mourning for the people in her tribe, the people that she wanted to quote unquote protect. There's no mourning for those people. She's just super exhilarated that she became a hunter.
I will agree and disagree on that point there. I did not read those emotions at all.
Oh yeah, she's smiling. She's like about to
She's
cry.
not
Oh,
smiling.
she
Oh my
totally does. And
gosh.
then and
No.
I could bring up a still and show you. She's
I
totally smiling. And then
dude,
there's
I
this little
watched the
girl that
movie
looks at her.
twice.
Yeah, then there's this little girl that looks at her and she smiles at the little girl while she's holding the staff. Like she's definitely smiling and happy. And her mother is smiling at her and stuff. And it's like, dude, half your tribe is dead. What's going on here?
I would not classify it in that way at all. But I will say I could have used a little bit of an acknowledgement of what happened in that scene. I don't think they acknowledge it, but I don't think she's sitting there like smiling. I would not classify it that way at all.
It's like a tired and fatigued exhilaration, but she's definitely excited.
I disagree extremely with that. I read it a lot more of a relief, a moment where she could breathe. Up to the bear interaction, I think that's what she thinks she's doing. But once the bear interaction happens, it's she's all about surviving and running and finding her brother and protecting him and like warning him. Everything that comes in her path is just in her way of doing those things. She saw this monster go hand to hand with a bear, a grizzly bear, which is the apex predator of that region. She is all about survival. She's not about hunting. Otherwise, she would have stood and fought one of the countless times that she was standing there next to the thing as it killed everything else. She was about survival. And it wasn't till the very end that she stood her ground and fought it. And at the very, very end, I do agree that they could have acknowledged a little bit about what happened to their tribe, right? A bunch of their members did get killed. But the look on her face and the look on her mother's face, I did not view that as like, oh, she's so happy she's a hunter now. I viewed it as like a relief of I survived that situation.
Yeah, I think we totally read those things differently because I disagree. She does definitely mention beyond the first third of the movie about hunting. So she does say, "Oh, I have to warn everybody, or I have to find my brother and warn him about this thing so that we can go hunt it." I liked a lot about her character. That was just the one thing that really turned me off.
Here's what I think both movies do really well is the way that they slowly introduce the predator, right? Each movie, though it depicts very different times and very different people, each movie feels like a completely different movie in the first third as you get these kind of tiny glimpses of the predator throughout until that initial moment of, oh crap. In Prey, it's the bear fight. And in Predator, it's when Anna runs away and I already forgot his name. The guy runs after her and just gets like destroyed. Those are the turning points of both movies. And the way that they use that time in the first third of those movies to like build up the characters and build up the world and give us a sense of where we are, I really enjoyed all that.
The authenticity that they had in both those movies. So in Prey with the Comanches and showing their lifestyle, their practices, their rituals, things like that, establishing that time period. And then in Predator, having half of your cast be Vietnam vets playing soldiers. I don't know if you knew this, but their training regiment for, I think, a month and a half, 2 months before the movie even started filming was insane. So they started training as a cohesive unit.
I believe it. They all look super jacked up.
Yeah, so as a cohesive unit, they would get up every morning early, 6 a.m., run 5 miles. Then they would go and weightlift for a couple of hours prior to going to rehearsals. Now, they also did combat training, survival training, and weapons training, as well as learning how to like signal non-verbally and move as a unit, move quietly. So they actually got all of this combat and survival training.
I believe it. That scene in which they crawl down the hill, that looked legit.
As legit as I know, while I was watching that scene, I was like, this is kind of pointless, but I'm wondering if they put it in here because it's realistic.
I know about as much about being in the military as I do about the Comanche people. So,
But what we've seen has told us that it is pretty dang authentic.
yeah, it looks pretty good. I will not lie. It definitely has an 80s movie feel to it. All of the nonverbal communication and lead up to the camp and everything. Yeah, that was really great. I'm just gonna give a pass to the special effects because obviously the one in 2022 looks better than the one from 1987. The practical and digital, well, I mean, there weren't even digital effects in the other one. And I thought the digital effects they did a really good job with. It probably had a lower budget than most other Predator movies because they have steadily decreased in their success up until Prey. And so there was a few moments where there were CGI animals in motion, like when the wolf was chasing the rabbit. I think there was a few shots of the bear that I was like, oh, that was a little bit wonky. Overall, still looked amazing, and you can't really compare 2022 special effects to 1987 special effects. So I'm just going to take that out of account. But the cinematography in Prey hands down wins it for me. Cinematography in Prey versus Predator, Prey wins that category.
And I thought when I watched Predator, I thought, oh man, this looks great. I mean, they got some good establishing shots of the jungle.
The shots of the helicopters flying over the jungle, I really like that.
Yeah, and then eventually though, towards the end of the movie, you're like, all right, I'm kind of getting bored of just seeing so much green. And so it was nice to
Yeah.
have the diverse settings in Prey. And
Hmm.
like I said, I mean, almost near Lord of the Rings or Revenant, establishing shots and scenic panning and just
Yeah.
so good.
So in the category of cinematography, I would give it to Prey. It sounds like you are in agreement on
Yeah,
that one.
definitely.
In the category of the Predator itself, I would also give it to Prey. I thought the gadgetry that we saw, the design, and the character itself, I think all played better in Prey for me than in Predator. Now, I will say Prey has the advantage of being able to pull from a lot of different sequels of Predator and comics of Predator and like the net that goes out and like constricts down. Like there's a lot of cool things and they made new ones too. I don't ever remember seeing that shield before. Maybe it exists in a comic or something, but I thought that as far as the Predator itself goes, I would probably also give it to Prey. I don't know if you feel the same.
No, I think I would agree because I agreed with what you said that I think the Predator was more of a character in Prey than it was in the first one.
Hmm.
So I definitely agree with that one too.
I think the supporting cast take Arnold and Naru out of the situation. The supporting cast, I think overall, I think it's a tie for me. I know that you talked a lot about how much you liked a lot of the characters in the unit. I never really felt too attached to any of them. Most of them I really only thought of as an individual quality, right?
Like the shaving for Mac.
The shaving, yeah, the guy who just shaves his whole head constantly, the guy with the chain gun who chews tobacco, the guy who made all the dirty jokes, the guy that I can't remember, and then Carl Weathers, I felt like did a really good job. But on the flip side, I think the brother also did a really good job. So I think when it comes down to it, beat for beat, and taking the mother into account in Prey, I think I would probably give it a tie.
Honestly, the only reason why I think I would give it to Predator because as you were talking, I was like, I know where he's going with this, and I'm agreeing with almost every single thing, and it probably would be a tie for me too, but I think I kind of have to give it to Predator only because Carl Weathers and some of the other supporting actors, I think, in Predator bring charisma to the screen that I don't think some of the newer actors can do in Prey. And I think that's only just a matter of experience, honestly.
I think Carl Weathers is the reason it's a tie. I think I would definitely be giving it to Prey if it wasn't for Carl Weathers.
Yeah.
By far the most compelling character out of all of them. But I do really like the brother and I really like the mom. And I was able I don't know any of their names because at the end of Predator they literally just like bring up each character and tell you their name, like instead of just like regular credits, like you actually see the person, see the name, see the real name. uh so if it wasn't for that I wouldn't even know their names either. But I could still distinguish between a lot of the other hunters to probably about the same degree. I mean, none of them did like weird things like shave their head, but
Yeah, see, to me, it was just kind of like there was the older hunter who really kept nudging Naru. There was the younger one that dies at the lion. And those were the only two that really stuck out to me. And even then, I don't remember their names. You mentioned one of my favorite things about the original Predator was it's kind of like a sad ending. It's kind of like a crazy ending how it ends. Then they go into this almost sitcom-y 80s style short clip of everyone smiling into the camera in their costume.
it's very 80s, very 80s. But if they didn't do that, I wouldn't know that Shane Black was the one guy.
I didn't catch that. That's kind of cool.
I actually looked it up to be sure it was the right Shane Black, too. I was like, is that just a different person named Shane Black? No, it's the same guy.
It's such a shame that his film flopped.
We got to compare Arnold and Naru. This is hard, right? It's just like completely different characters, right? Arnold, no matter what he's in, is always Arnold. If you listen back to this whole thing, how many times did we ever say his character's name? Twice. This singles it out as an Arnold movie. I feel like maybe the movie where I feel this the least amount is maybe like Terminator and Terminator 2, but most other Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, it's Arnold, to watch it and not just be thinking Arnold Schwarzenegger and not the character is hard. So, like, from that standpoint, Amber Midthunder, who plays Naru, I think would win. But, like, Arnold just has this charisma, you know? So, I have to give it to Arnold. I have to give it to Arnold. She does a great job. I know you had some problems with her, but if for no other reason, she never flings that axe at somebody, pinning them to a tree, and says, stick around. Even though I haven't seen Predator in probably 10 years, I can't believe I didn't remember that line because I just loved it so much. I like how Arnold figures out the thing about the mud more than how she figures out the medicine that cools your blood. But I liked her ingenuity and planning in the final fight more than Arnold's. But I think personally to me, I liked Prey a little bit better.
I would agree with that. The way that cinematography has evolved since the 80s gives Prey a big edge. The action was better, you got more Predator, more depth in the Predator, and it was cool.
For sure. I think like just how we shoot action nowadays and what they can do with action because of special effects and like we have already talked about a million times, the cinematography is just beautiful. I think those things just give it the edge to the original Predator. I like the original Predator. I think a lot of people saying, "Oh, it's still not as good as the original Predator." I think some of that is nostalgia, and I think some of that is also the fact that of the originality, right? You always give an edge to the thing that's more original, and this is definitely back to basics, very similar structure to a degree as the first movie. So I think you give an edge to originality and also some nostalgia, I think leads to people saying Predator is better. And I wouldn't fault anyone for saying Predator is better. But I think for me, Prey has the edge overall. And I think everyone can agree that Predator and Prey are by far the top two of the series.
Oh my gosh, yes, definitely. Which I thought was interesting that they ended up bringing in the pistol from the second movie.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. I feel like we're gonna, they're setting up like maybe we'll make a sequel if you like this enough. Because the predator species needs to get that pistol.
Well, so did you see the end credits scene?
Yeah, with the predators, with like the ships coming in, well, the drawings, but yeah, the ships coming in.
Yeah, I wonder if that's how maybe they exchanged some sort of trophy and that's how they got the pistol.
I think that if this doesn't get a direct sequel, it ended in a way that you can make that inference. And if it does get a direct sequel, we'll see it happen. But honestly, if I was going to get another Predator movie, I don't want to actually see a direct sequel to this, even though I really really liked it. I would love to see more Predator movies done in this style where we take a snapshot of different time periods.
Right, like jump another 100 or 150 years in the future or something,
Sure.
or even in the past.
Yeah, or do it where they're in a different. I've seen some people talk online about like feudal Japan or something. So I think it would be really cool to see Predator movies that take place in different time periods.
Okay, so some trivia here. One of the first things that I noticed in Predator, and this was mentioned twice, it was also mentioned in the second movie as well, is that they come during heat waves. So this is one of those things that helps with world building, just some lore that they kind of plug in there to help with world building. And it's very enigmatic, and nothing is really done with that other than them just saying they come during heat waves. And I thought that was really interesting, but they didn't mention it in Prey. But, anyways, moving on from that, because I'm just not sure what that significance is. Mid Thunder herself said that she had gotten a call from the director about getting the role of Naru in Prey. And she had this to say. She says, I got a call from a random number, and it was Dan Trachtenberg, who made the movie. And I was like, oh, this is either going to go good or bad. And then he said, if you had to get somewhere by air and you couldn't go by land, sea, or legs, what would you do? I said, hang glider. And he was like, no, it has an engine. And I was like, oh, a hot air balloon. And he was like, no, you're supposed to say, get to the chopper because you're going to be Arnold in this movie. And she's like, oh, I failed. But then she goes, oh, not quite what you had in mind. Not like the dream scenario of how that would go down, but that was how I found out.
Yeah, that's funny. Also, I noticed, I'm not sure if you have this written down, but some of the lines from Predator show up in Prey. Like, if it bleeds, we can kill it. But since I had watched them back to back, I noticed.
So this might blow your mind because this blew my mind. This theory, I have two theories, but these two theories were brought to my attention when a friend of mine sent me a meme, and it had this to say. The meme is a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger holding up some dog tags. So in Predator 1, which is set in 1987, the characters come into contact with these bodies hanging up in the forest that the predator has already killed, and one of the bodies holds name tags called from a guy named Jim Hopper. And Dutch says that he was a former operative that served alongside him in the past. And Arnold says that, he says more than once in the movie that Jim was basically capable of escaping difficult situations. Now, Stranger Things 4 is set in 1986, and Jim Hopper says he served in a war and proves to have great skills in escaping dangerous situations.
I was wondering if this is where it was going to go. I did notice this in the movie when they said Jim Hopper. I was like, oh, Stranger Things.
So this gives me two theories that are admittedly a little bit meta, but here are my two theories. Number one, Predator takes place in an alternate universe where Hopper from Stranger Things never left the army, or maybe even rejoined after the death of his child and ended up dying to the Predator in the jungle while the events in Hawkins were taking place unbeknownst to him. Or Hopper is going to survive the events of Stranger Things Season 5, which will take place before 1987, and become renowned as a monster hunter. But he is going to lose Joyce and Eleven to the events of that last season and will have nowhere else to go but back to the military, as there'll be nothing tying him back to Hawkins. So he will end up in that forest hunting the Predator for the US Army and will die.
The only problem with that theory, I love it, for one. Absolutely love it. It's amazing. I would love to see like a comic where that happens. Kind of like there's a comic where like Han Solo meets Indiana Jones, right? So I would love to see that. But the problem with that theory is that season 5 of Stranger Things is going to have they've already said is going to have a big time jump. So I don't think we're going to I think it's going to take place in like 1988 or 1989, to be honest. But I do, maybe even the 90s, to be honest. But I do love that theory. And I would love to see a comic where that happens, where Hopper is like a monster hunter and goes and fights the Predator. It would be amazing. Yeah, that's great. No, I did notice that his name was Jim Hopper when they said it. I was just like, oh, Stranger Things.
Yeah, so next time we'll talk about Bullet Train, a new action movie starring Brad Pitt.
Mm-hmm.
Looks wild, looks fun.
It does look wild and fun. I've heard both those things. Have not gotten a chance to see it yet, but yeah, it definitely looks like a crazy time. I'm looking forward to it.
So that's all for today's episode. Please subscribe, follow, and leave a review on whatever podcasting medium you use. And please check out our YouTube channel for additional content. Join us next week, and thank you for listening to the Ultimate Age of the Geek. So we're kind of new to this podcast thing, but we could not have gotten started without Buzzsprout. They make things so easy, such as telling us what equipment is necessary for a podcaster, even a beginning podcaster like ourselves. They even offer you the ability to blast your podcast out to every major distributor. And right now they're having a promotion that if you sign up to use one of their very cheap plans, you can get a $20 Amazon gift card to go towards maybe equipment. So give Buzzsprout a try today and click the link in our description.